The morning sun hit the tall iron gates of Hartwell Academy, and 16-year-old Elena Reyes stood there with her worn-out backpack hanging from one shoulder. She looked up at the massive building in front of her. It was nothing like the public schools she had attended before. This place looked like something from a movie. Tall white columns stood at the entrance. The grass was perfectly cut. Expensive cars lined up in the parking lot, dropping off students in designer clothes. Elena took a deep breath and walked through the gates. She had earned her spot here, not through money or family connections, but through hard work, a full academic scholarship. She had studied late nights while her mother worked double shifts. She had read borrowed books under dim lights. And now, here she was, walking into one of the most elite private schools in the country. But as she stepped onto the campus, she felt the eyes on her dot students whispered as she passed by. Some looked at her shoes, which were clean but clearly old. Others glanced at her uniform, which was secondhand and slightly faded compared to the crisp new ones everyone else wore. Elena kept her head down and walked faster. She found her locker and began putting her things inside. A group of girls nearby laughed loudly about something, and Elena tried not to look their way. She just wanted to get through the day without drawing attention. But life had other plans. A voice cut through the hallway noise. It was high-pitched, confident, and dripping with superiority. "Oh my God, is that her?" Elena turned slightly and saw a girl with perfectly styled blonde hair walking toward her. The girl wore gold earrings that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. Behind her trailed two other girls, both looking at Elena like she was something they had stepped on. The blonde girl stopped right in front of Elena's locker and smiled. But it was not a kind smile. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before pouncing. "You must be the scholarship girl," the blonde said. "I'm Victoria Wellington. My family basically built this school." She paused, letting those words sink in. "And I heard something very interesting about you." Elena's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her face calm. "I don't know what you mean." Victoria leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I mean that your mother works for my family. She cleans our house. She scrubs our floors." Victoria straightened up and smiled wider. "So technically, you're the maid's daughter." The girls behind Victoria giggled. A few other students nearby stopped to watch. Elena felt her face grow warm, but she refused to look away. "My mother works hard," Elena said quietly. "There's nothing wrong with that." Victoria tilted her head, pretending to think. "Oh, I didn't say there was anything wrong with it. I just think it's funny that the help's daughter thinks she belongs here." She looked Elena up and down. "But I guess they let anyone in these days." With that, Victoria flipped her hair and walked away, her friends following close behind. The hallway slowly returned to normal, but Elena could still feel people staring. She grabbed her books and headed to class, her hand shaking slightly. That night, Elena sat on the old couch in their small apartment, waiting for her mother to come home. The place was tiny but clean. Her mother always made sure of that. There were flowers on the windowsill, picked from the garden of whoever's house she had cleaned that day. There was a small kitchen with pots that had seen better days. And in the corner of the living room sat an old electronic keyboard with some keys that stuck, and a sound that was never quite right. It had belonged to her father. The front door opened, and Rosa Reyes walked in, looking exhausted. She was a small woman with kind eyes and hands that were rough from years of scrubbing and cleaning. She smiled when she saw Elena, the tiredness in her face softening. "Mia," Rosa said, setting down her bag. "How was your first day?" Elena hesitated. She thought about telling her mother everything. About Victoria, about the whispers, about how everyone looked at her like she did not belong. But then she saw how tired her mother was. She saw the lines around her eyes. She thought about how hard Rosa worked, just to keep them afloat. "It was fine, Mama," Elena said, forcing a smile. "The school is really nice." Rosa studied her daughter's face for a moment, and Elena knew she was not fooled. But Rosa did not push. She just nodded and went to the kitchen to start making dinner. Later that night, after Rosa had fallen asleep on the couch with the television still on, Elena sat down at the old keyboard. She ran her fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar grooves and scratches. This keyboard had been through everything with her, moving from one small apartment to another, late nights when she could not sleep, sad days when she missed her father so much it felt like a hole in her chest. She closed her eyes and began to play. The notes filled the small room, soft at first, then building into something beautiful and heartbreaking. It was a piece by Chopin, one of her father's favorites. Her fingers moved across the keys like they had a memory of their own. The music spoke of loss, of longing, of love that never fades even when someone is gone. On the couch, Rosa stirred. She opened her eyes and listened, tears slowly rolling down her cheeks. She did not move or speak. She just lay there, letting the music wash over her. When Elena finished, the apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She turned and saw her mother watching her. "That was beautiful, Mia," Rosa whispered. "Your father would be so proud." Elena walked over and sat beside her mother. Rosa took her hand and held it tight. "I miss him, Mama," Elena said softly. "I know," Rosa replied. "I miss him too." Every single day, they sat together in the quiet, holding on to each other and the memory of a man who had loved music more than anything in the world. A man who had given up his dreams so his family can have a better life. A man who had taught his daughter to play piano before she could even read. Elena thought about the talent show poster she had seen at school that day, the Winter Gala Talent Showcase. It was the biggest event of the year, judged by some famous pianist from overseas. Students had been talking about it all day, bragging about what pieces they would perform. For a moment, Elena had imagined herself on that stage, playing for a real audience, showing everyone what she could do. But then she remembered Victoria's words, the maid's daughter. She remembered the laughs, the stares, the whispers. "No," Elena told herself. She was not there to perform. She was there to study, to get good grades, to make something of herself so her mother would not have to clean houses forever. The piano was just for her, and for her mother, and for the memory of her father. That was enough. Or at least, that is what she kept telling herself. But deep down, in a place she did not like to visit, there was a small voice, a voice that remembered what her father used to say. "Music is meant to be shared, Mia. It is how the soul speaks when words are not enough." Elena pushed that voice away and went to bed. But even as she closed her eyes, she could still hear it, whispering in the dark. Maybe one day, she thought. Maybe one day, but not today. Elena was 3 years old, the first time she touched a piano. She still remembered it clearly. Her father, Miguel, had taken her to a music shop in their old neighborhood. The shop was dusty and cramped, filled with guitars hanging from the ceiling and drums stacked in corners. But in the middle of the room sat an old, upright piano. Its wood scratched and its bench wobbly. Miguel had lifted her onto that bench and placed her tiny fingers on the keys. "Press 1, he said softly. Elena pressed the white key and a sound came out. It was simple, just one note, but her eyes went wide like she had discovered magic. Miguel laughed and kissed the top of her head. "You hear that, Mia? That is the sound of possibility. Every song that ever existed started with just one note." From that day on, Elena was obsessed. She would climb onto the piano bench every chance she got, pressing keys and listening to the sounds they made. At first, it was just noise, random and messy. But Miguel was patient. He sat beside her for hours, teaching her scales, showing her how to read music. explaining why certain notes sounded beautiful together while others clashed. By the time Elena was 5, she could play simple songs. By 7, she was working through pieces that most kids did not attempt until they were teenagers. And by 10, something incredible happened. Miguel came home one evening after a long day of work. He drove a delivery truck back then, hauling boxes from warehouses to stores across the city. His back always hurt, and his hands were rough and calloused. But when he walked through the door that night, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Elena was playing Chopin's Fantasie-Impromptu. It was one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. Professional musicians spent years perfecting it. Yet there was his 10-year-old daughter, sitting at their second-hand keyboard, playing it like she had been born, knowing how. Miguel stood in the doorway, unable to move. Tears filled his eyes. Rosa came up behind him and took his hand, and together they listened in silence until Elena finished. When the last note faded, Elena turned around and saw her parents standing there. She looked worried, like maybe she had done something wrong. "Papa, are you okay?" Miguel walked over and knelt beside her. He took her small hands in his rough ones and looked into her eyes. "Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "do you know what you just did? Do you understand how special that was?" Elena shook her head. To her, it was just playing. Just something she loved to do. Miguel smiled through his tears. "You have a gift, Mia. A gift from God. Promise me you will never stop playing." "Promise me." "I promise, Papa." That was the last year they had together. 6 months later, Miguel was driving his delivery truck on a rainy night. A car ran a red light and hit him from the side. He died before the ambulance could reach the hospital. Elena was 11 years old. After the funeral, she did not touch the piano for 3 months. Every time she looked at it, she saw her father's face. She heard his voice telling her to press just one note. She remembered the way he would sit beside her, humming along as she played. His eyes closed and a peaceful smile on his lips. It hurt too much. But one night, Rosa found Elena sitting on the floor beside the keyboard, just staring at it. Rosa sat down next to her daughter and put an arm around her. "You know," Rosa said quietly, "your father used to say that music was how he talked to God. When words failed him, when life was hard, he would play. And somehow, everything felt lighter." Elena wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I can play without him, Mama." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe you are not playing without him. Maybe when you play, he's right there with you, listening, smiling, proud." That night, Elena sat down at the keyboard for the first time since her father's death. She played one note, then another, and then, slowly, a melody began to form. It was sad and beautiful, full of all the things she could not say out loud. When she finished, she felt something she had not felt in months. She felt close to her father again. From that moment on, Elena played every single day. But she never performed for anyone except her mother. The music was too personal, too sacred. It was her private conversation with her father, and she was not ready to share it with the world. Years passed. Elena grew older. She and her mother moved to a smaller apartment when money got tight. Rosa took more cleaning jobs, sometimes working 16-hour days just to pay the bills. Through it all, Elena studied hard and kept her grades perfect, knowing that education was her only way out. And every night, no matter how tired she was, she played the piano. Now, at Hartwell Academy, Elena had discovered something wonderful. On the 3rd floor of the music building, at the end of a long hallway, there was a practice room that nobody seemed to use. Inside sat a beautiful grand piano, its black surface shining under the soft lights. The room was supposed to be locked after hours, but Elena noticed that the janitor sometimes forgot to secure it. She started sneaking in at night. The first time she sat at that grand piano, she almost cried. It was nothing like her old keyboard at home. The keys were smooth and responsive. The sound was rich and full, filling the room like warm sunlight. When she played, it felt like her father was sitting right beside her. Elena went back every night she could. She would wait until the building was empty, slip into the practice room, and play for hours. She worked through all of her father's favorite pieces. Chopin, Beethoven, Debussy. She played with her eyes closed, letting the music carry her away from scholarship worries, from Victoria's cruel words, from everything. One Thursday night, she was deep into Chopin's Ballade No. 1. It was a long and emotional piece, full of drama and beauty. Elena played like her life depended on it, pouring every ounce of feeling into the keys. She did not hear the door open. When she finished, she sat in silence for a moment, letting the last notes fade. Then she heard something behind her. A soft sound, like someone catching their breath. Elena spun around, her heart racing. An old man stood in the doorway. He wore a janitor's uniform, and his white hair was thin and messy. He held a mop in one hand, but he had clearly forgotten all about it. His eyes were wide and wet with tears. "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly, standing up. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. Please don't report me. I'll leave right now." But the old man did not move. He just stood there, staring at her like he had seen a ghost. "Child," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "where did you learn to play like that?" Elena hesitated. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he was not angry. He was moved. "My father taught me," she said softly. "He passed away 5 years ago." The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked slowly into the room and sat down on a chair near the window. He set his mop aside and looked at Elena with an expression she could not quite read. "My name is Henry," he said. "I've worked at this school for 22 years. Before that, I taught music at a conservatory downtown." He paused. "I've heard a lot of students play in this room. Some of them good, some of them great." He shook his head slowly. "But I have never heard anyone play like you just did." Elena did not know what to say. She stood there, clutching her hands together, unsure whether to run or stay. Henry leaned forward. "That piece you played, Chopin's Ballade. Do you know what it's about?" Elena nodded. "It's about loss and memory and finding hope even when everything feels broken." Henry smiled, and for the first time, Elena saw warmth in his tired eyes. "Your father taught you well," he said, "and I think he would want you to share that gift with the world." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "I can't. It's too personal. It's all I have left of him." Henry stood up slowly, his old bones creaking. He picked up his mop and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned back one last time. "The things we love most," he said quietly, "are never really ours to keep. They're meant to be given away. That's what makes them beautiful." He walked out, leaving Elena alone with the piano and the silence. She stood there for a long time, thinking about his words, thinking about her father, thinking about the music she kept locked inside. Maybe one day, she thought, maybe one day I'll be brave enough. But for now, she sat back down at the piano and began to play again. Just for herself. Just for her father. Just for a little while longer. Victoria Wellington was not used to being ignored. That she had spent weeks trying to make Elena's life miserable. She whispered insults in the hallways. She made jokes about maids and scholarships loud enough for everyone to hear. She even convinced some of the other students to avoid sitting near Elena in class, but none of it seemed to work. Elena just kept her head down, went to her classes, and disappeared after school like a ghost. She never fought back. She never cried in public. She never gave Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her break, and that drove Victoria crazy. One evening, Victoria stayed late at school for a student council meeting. The meeting ran long, and by the time it ended, the hallways were dark and empty. She was walking toward the exit when she heard something strange. Music. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere above her. Victoria stopped and listened. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, full of emotion and power. It echoed through the empty building like a voice from another world. Victoria followed the sound. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and walked down the long hallway toward the music wing. The music grew louder with every step. Finally, she reached a practice room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, and golden light spilled out into the darkness. Victoria peeked inside and almost gasped out loud. It was Elena, the scholarship girl, the maid's daughter, was sitting at a grand piano, her eyes closed, her fingers flying across the keys. She played like nothing Victoria had ever seen before, not like the stiff mechanical performances Victoria had witnessed at recitals. This was something else entirely. This was raw and real and absolutely breathtaking. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move. Part of her wanted to stay and listen, but another part, the petty and jealous part, felt something else rising inside her. Anger. How dare Elena be this good at something? How dare she hide this talent while Victoria and her friends struggled to stand out? It wasn't fair. Victoria had spent years taking piano lessons from expensive teachers. She had performed at recitals and received polite applause. But deep down, she knew she was only average. She played the notes correctly, but there was no magic in it. And here was Elena, playing with more soul and skill than anyone Victoria had ever heard. Victoria slipped away before Elena could notice her. But as she walked to her car, a plan began to form in her mind. A cruel, clever plan. If Elena wanted to hide her talent, Victoria would drag it out into the open. And when Elena choked in front of the whole school, Victoria would be there to watch her fall. The next day, Victoria went to the talent show committee. Her family donated more money to the school than anyone else, so the committee members always listened to whatever she had to say. She smiled sweetly and made her suggestion. "I think we should make this year's winter gala more inclusive," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "We should randomly select some students who didn't sign up. Give everyone a fair chance to participate. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" The committee members exchanged looks. It was an unusual request, but they didn't want to upset the Wellington family. They agreed. Victoria made sure Elena's name was at the top of the random selection list. 2 weeks before the winter gala, the entire school gathered in the auditorium for an assembly. Principal Dawson stood at the podium, reading off announcements about upcoming events. Elena sat in the back row, barely paying attention. She was thinking about the piece she had been practicing, wondering if she could finally master the difficult passage in the middle section. Then she heard her name. "And now, for a special announcement about our Winter Gala Talent Showcase," Principal Dawson said. "This year, we've decided to randomly select some students to participate, to give everyone an equal opportunity. The following students have been chosen." Elena's heart began to pound. First up, Elena Reyes. The auditorium buzzed with whispers. Elena felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her. Her face went hot, and her hands gripped the edges of her seat. From the front row, Victoria turned around with a smile that could cut glass. "Oh, how exciting," she said loudly. "The scholarship girl gets to perform. I can't wait to see what hidden talent she has." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elena wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink through the floor and never come back. Principal Dawson cleared his throat. "Elena, do you accept the invitation to perform?" The auditorium fell silent. Everyone watched her, waiting for her to refuse. waiting for her to admit she had nothing to offer. Victoria's smile grew wider, like a predator closing in on its prey. Elena thought about saying no. She thought about making an excuse and walking away. It would be so easy. She could go back to being invisible, back to playing alone in the dark practice room where no one could judge her. But then she thought about her mother. Rosa had sacrificed everything for her. She had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets so Elena could have a better life. She had worked until her hands were raw and her body was exhausted. And she had never once complained. She had never once made Elena feel like a burden. Elena thought about her father too, about his words that still echoed in her mind after all these years. Music is meant to be shared, Mia. It is how the soul speaks when words are not enough. Elena stood up slowly. The whispers stopped. Even Victoria's smile flickered with uncertainty. "I'll do it," Elena said. Her voice was quiet but steady. A murmur ran through the crowd. Principal Dawson looked surprised but pleased. "Wonderful. We look forward to your performance." But Elena wasn't finished. "I have one condition," she added. The auditorium went silent again. Victoria raised an eyebrow, curious despite herself. "I want my mother to be there," Elena said. "As a guest. In the audience." Victoria burst out laughing. She didn't even try to hide it. "Your mother? The maid?" She looked around at her friends, who joined in the laughter. "You want the cleaning lady sitting with our parents? That's adorable." That's adorable." More students laughed. The sound filled the auditorium, bouncing off the walls like sharp little knives. Elena stood there and took it all. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. When the laughter finally died down, she spoke again. "Yes," Elena said simply. "She's the reason I play. She deserves to be there more than anyone." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Fine. Bring whoever you want. It won't change what's about to happen." She turned back around, satisfied that she had already won. But something in Elena's eyes had changed. There was a fire there now, small but burning. A determination that hadn't existed before. After the assembly, Elena walked through the hallways in a daze. She couldn't believe what she had just done. She had agreed to perform in front of the entire school, in front of wealthy parents and important guests, in front of a world-famous pianist who was coming to judge the competition. What was she thinking? She found herself standing outside the old practice room on the 3rd floor. The door was unlocked, as usual. She slipped inside and sat down at the piano, her hands trembling. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at the keys. Then she heard a voice behind her. "I heard what happened at the assembly." Elena turned and saw Henry standing in the doorway, his mop resting against the wall. His eyes were kind, as always. "Everyone's laughing at me," Elena said quietly. "They think I'm going to fail." Henry walked over and sat down in his usual chair by the window. "Let them laugh," he said. "Laughter from small people means nothing. What matters is what you know to be true." Elena shook her head. "I don't know if I can do this. Playing alone is one thing, but in front of all those people..." Henry was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward. "When I was young," he said, "I was terrified of performing. My hands would shake. My mind would go blank. I thought I would never be good enough." He paused. "But then my teacher told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Don't play for the audience. Don't play for the judges. Play for the one person who matters most. Play for the person who believes in you.'" Elena thought about her mother, about the way Rosa listened when she played, with tears in her eyes and love on her face. "Play for her," Henry said softly. "Forget everyone else. Just play for her." Elena nodded slowly. She turned back to the piano and placed her fingers on the keys. She had 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to face her fears. 2 weeks to turn her pain into something beautiful. Victoria wanted a show? Fine. Elena would give her one she would never forget. The night of the winter gala arrived faster than Elena expected. She stood in front of the small mirror in their apartment, trying to calm her breathing. Her dress was simple, a deep blue gown that her mother had sewn by hand over the past 2 weeks. Rosa had stayed up late every night, stitching by lamplight after coming home from work. The fabric wasn't expensive, but Rosa had made it beautiful with careful details and delicate embroidery along the edges. "You look like a princess," Rosa said softly, standing in the doorway. Elena turned and saw her mother dressed in a modest black dress, the nicest thing she owned. Rosa had done her hair differently tonight, pinned up with a small flower tucked behind her ear. Around her neck hung a simple locket that contained a tiny photo of Miguel. "Mama, you didn't have to do all this," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly. Rosa walked over and took her daughter's hands. "I wanted to. Tonight is special." She paused and looked into Elena's eyes. "Are you nervous?" Elena nodded. She couldn't lie. Her stomach was twisted in knots, and her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Rosa squeezed her hands. "Listen to me, Mia. No matter what happens tonight, I am already the proudest mother in the world. You have nothing to prove to anyone. Just play the way you always play for me. That's all you have to do." Elena hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and lavender. For a moment, she felt like a little girl again, safe in her mother's arms. "Let's go," Elena whispered, "before I lose my courage." The auditorium at Hartwell Academy had been transformed into a wonderland. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft golden light across the room. White flowers decorated every table. Waiters in black suits moved through the crowd, carrying trays of fancy appetizers. The wealthiest families in the city had gathered for the event, dressed in designer gowns and expensive suits. Elena and Rosa entered through a side door. Immediately, Elena felt eyes on them. Whispers spread through the crowd like ripples on water. She heard fragments of conversation as they walked. "Is that the scholarship girl? Who's the woman with her? I heard she's a maid. Can you believe they let her in?" Rosa held her head high and kept walking. She had faced judgment her whole life. A few whispers from strangers meant nothing to her. Elena tried to follow her mother's example, keeping her eyes forward as they found seats in the back row. The program began with a welcome speech from Principal Dawson. He talked about the school's proud tradition of excellence, about the talented students who would perform tonight, and about the special guest judge who had flown in from Europe just for this event. Maestro Leonard Ashford. Elena had read about him in music magazines. He was one of the greatest pianists of his generation, a legend who had performed in concert halls around the world. He was known for being harsh and critical, rarely impressed by anyone. He hadn't taken on a new student in over 15 years, and tonight he would be judging her performance. Elena's hands began to tremble. She hid them in her lap and tried to focus on breathing. The performances began. Students took the stage one by one, playing violin, singing opera, performing classical dance. Some were good. Some were mediocre. The audience clapped politely after each one, but no one seemed truly moved. Then Victoria Wellington walked onto the stage. She wore a stunning red gown that probably cost more than a year's worth of Rosa's salary. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat. She smiled confidently at the audience, basking in the attention. "Good evening," Victoria said into the microphone. "I'll be performing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata." She sat down at the grand piano and began to play. Technically, it was flawless. Victoria hit every note correctly. Her timing was precise. Her posture was perfect. But as Elena listened, she noticed something missing. There was no feeling behind the notes. No story. No soul. It was like watching someone read a poem without understanding what the words meant. When Victoria finished, the audience applauded warmly. Her parents stood up and clapped the loudest, beaming with pride. Victoria bowed gracefully and walked off stage, shooting a smug look in Elena's direction. A few more students performed. Then, finally, Principal Dawson returned to the microphone. And now, for our final performance of the evening. Please welcome Elena Reyes. The auditorium fell quiet. Elena stood up on shaky legs. She felt Rosa grab her hand and squeeze it one last time. "Play for me, Mia," Rosa whispered. "Just for me." Elena nodded and walked toward the stage. The distance seemed impossibly long. She could feel every single pair of eyes on her, judging her simple dress, her nervous steps, her trembling hands. She heard whispers and a few muffled laughs. When she reached the stage, she stood before the grand piano and looked out at the sea of faces. In the front row, Victoria sat with her arms crossed, a cruel smile on her lips. Beside her, wealthy parents waited with skeptical expressions. And in the very back, Rosa sat alone, clutching Miguel's photo in her locket, her eyes filled with love and fear. Elena stepped up to the microphone. Her voice came out soft, almost fragile. "Before I play, I want to say something." The audience stirred. This wasn't part of the normal routine. Victoria's smile flickered. Elena took a deep breath. "This piece is for my mother. She's sitting in the back row tonight." She paused, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "My mother has cleaned houses her whole life so I could go to school. She has worked double shifts and skipped meals so I could have a future. She sewed this dress I'm wearing with her own hands after working 12 hours on her feet." The whispers died down. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elena continued. "My father taught me to play piano. He passed away when I was 11, but his music lives in me. Everything I have, everything I am, is because of my parents." She looked directly at her mother. "This is for you, Mama, and for Papa. I hope I make you proud." She turned and sat down at the piano. The auditorium was completely silent now. Even Victoria had stopped smiling. Elena closed her eyes. She placed her fingers on the keys. She thought about her father, about his gentle hands guiding hers across the keyboard when she was small. She thought about her mother, sitting in the back row, holding on to hope and love and memory. And then she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated through the air like the first drops of rain before a storm. Soft and delicate at first, drawing the audience in. Then the melody began to build, growing stronger and more complex with each passing measure. Elena forgot about the audience. She forgot about Victoria and the whispers and the judgment. She was no longer in the auditorium. She was back in their tiny apartment, playing for her mother. She was sitting beside her father, feeling his warmth and hearing his laughter. She was everywhere and nowhere, lost completely in the music. The piece moved through waves of emotion. Sorrow and joy. Loss and hope. Darkness and light. Elena's fingers danced across the keys with a power and grace that seemed almost impossible. Every note was perfect, but more than that, every note meant something. The music breathed and lived and spoke directly to the hearts of everyone in the room. In the front row, Maestro Ashford leaned forward in his seat. His eyes widened. His mouth fell slightly open. In all his years of judging competitions, he had never heard anything like this. Victoria's face went pale. Her confident smirk had vanished completely. She stared at Elena like she was seeing her for the first time. In the back row, Rosa wept silently. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to her daughter pour out her soul. She clutched the locket with Miguel's photo and whispered, Do you hear her, my love? Do you hear our girl? The piece reached its climax, a thundering cascade of notes that filled every corner of the auditorium. Then it softened again, fading into a gentle, heartbreaking finale. The last notes hung in the air like a prayer dot, and then silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire room sat frozen, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the audience, someone began to clap. Another person joined. Then another. And another dot. Suddenly, the entire auditorium erupted into applause. People rose from their seats. A standing ovation thundered through the room, louder than anything that had come before. Elena sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, tears streaming down her face. She looked out at the crowd and found her mother in the back row. Rosa was standing too, clapping and crying and smiling all at once. Elena had done it. She had shared her gift with the world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The applause seemed to go on forever. Elena sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the sound washing over her. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared her for how it would actually feel. Her whole body was shaking. Tears blurred her vision. She could barely breathe. Slowly, she stood up from the bench and faced the audience. People were still on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others shook their heads in disbelief, as if they still couldn't process what they had just heard. Then something unexpected happened. Maestro Leonard Ashford rose from his seat in the front row. The applause began to fade as people noticed him moving. He walked toward the stage with slow, deliberate steps. His face was unreadable, and a hush fell over the auditorium. Elena's heart pounded. She didn't know what to expect. Was he angry? Disappointed? Had she done something wrong? The maestro climbed the steps to the stage and stood before her. He was tall and elegant, with silver hair and deep-set eyes that had seen a lifetime of music. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, studying her face like he was trying to understand something. Then he spoke. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "In my 60 years of life, I have performed on the greatest stages in the world. Vienna, Paris, Tokyo, New York. I have heard thousands of musicians, from eager students to celebrated masters." He paused, and Elena held her breath. "But tonight," he continued, "I heard something I have not heard in a very long time." His voice cracked slightly, and Elena saw moisture gathering in his eyes. "I heard truth. I heard a soul speaking through music. I heard something that cannot be taught, only born." A murmur rippled through the audience. People leaned forward in their seats. The maestro turned to face the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed tonight was not just a performance. It was a gift. A rare and precious gift that comes perhaps once in a generation." He turned back to Elena. "I closed my conservatory to new students 15 years ago. I told myself I would never teach again unless I found someone truly extraordinary." He reached out and took her trembling hands in his. "Tonight, I found her." Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Elena stared at him, unable to speak. "Elena Reyes," Maestro Ashford said, "I am offering you a full scholarship to study under me at the Ashford Conservatory in London. Everything will be provided. Tuition, housing, living expenses. All I ask in return is that you never stop playing, that you share this gift with the world for as long as you live." Elena's knees went weak. She thought she might faint. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. Girls who lived in tiny apartments. Girls whose mothers cleaned houses for a living. Girls who wore homemade dresses to fancy galas. But it was real. And it was happening. The audience erupted again, even louder than before. People cheered and whistled. Some called out her name. The sound was deafening. In the front row, Victoria sat frozen in her seat. Her face had gone completely white. She stared at the stage with wide eyes, her mouth hanging open. All her plans, all her schemes, had backfired spectacularly. She had wanted to humiliate Elena, and instead, she had given her the opportunity of a lifetime. Victoria's parents sat beside her, their expressions unreadable. Her father leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Whatever he said made Victoria shrink down in her seat, looking smaller than Elena had ever seen her. But Elena wasn't thinking about Victoria. She wasn't thinking about revenge or vindication or proving anyone wrong. She was thinking about her mother. Elena looked out at the back row and found Rosa standing there. Her hands pressed to her heart, tears streaming down her face. Without a word, Elena stepped away from the maestro and walked off the stage. She moved through the crowd, past the wealthy families in their expensive clothes, past the whispers and the stares. When she reached her mother, she fell into her arms. Rosa held her daughter tightly, sobbing into her hair. "Mia," she whispered. "My beautiful, beautiful girl. Your father is watching. He is so proud. I know he is." Elena cried too, holding on to her mother like she never wanted to let go. "I did it, Mama. I did it for you. For both of you." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the world around them faded away. Nothing else mattered. Not the fancy gala, or the important people, or the life-changing scholarship. In that moment, there was only a mother and daughter, bound together by love and sacrifice and a dream that had finally come true. Later that night, after the gala had ended and the guests had gone home, Elena found herself wandering the empty hallways of the school. She made her way to the 3rd floor, to the practice room at the end of the hall. Henry was there, mopping the floor like always. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "The whole school is talking about it." Elena sat down on the bench near the window, the same spot where Henry always sat when he listened to her play. "I still can't believe it. It doesn't feel real." Henry set down his mop and walked over to her. He sat down slowly, his old joints creaking. "It's real," he said, "and you deserve every bit of it." Elena looked at him, this kind old man who had encouraged her when she needed it most. "Thank you, Henry, for everything. For listening. For believing in me." Henry shook his head. "I didn't do anything. You did all the work. I just reminded you of what you already knew." He paused and looked toward the piano. "Your father would be proud, you know? Not because of the scholarship or the maestro or any of that, but because you were brave enough to share your gift. That takes more courage than anything else." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes again. She had cried so much tonight, she didn't think she had any tears left. But somehow, there were always more. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I almost didn't do it. I almost walked away." Henry nodded. "Fear is natural. It means you care about something. The brave ones aren't the people who feel no fear. They're the ones who feel it and do the thing anyway." He smiled gently. "You're one of the brave ones, Elena." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside the window, the moon hung full and bright in the winter sky. Finally, Elena stood up. "I should get home. My mother is waiting." Henry stood too and walked her to the door. Before she left, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a young man with dark hair sitting at a grand piano, his eyes closed, completely lost in the music. "That's me," Henry said, 40 years ago, when I still believed I could change the world with music." He pressed the photo into Elena's hand. "Keep it. Let it remind you the dreams don't have an expiration date. It's never too late to share what's in your heart." Elena looked at the photo, then at Henry. She hugged him tightly, surprising both of them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." She walked out of the practice room and down the empty hallway. Tomorrow, everything would change. There would be interviews and phone calls and a million decisions to make. There would be a new school in a new country and a whole new life waiting for her. But tonight, she was just Elena, the maid's daughter, the scholarship girl, the girl who played piano for her mother and carried her father's memory in every note. She stepped out into the cold night air and looked up at the stars. "I did it, Papa," she whispered to the sky. "I finally did it." Somewhere far away, or maybe somewhere very close, she could have sworn she heard music playing. Soft and beautiful, like a lullaby. Like a father's love that never fades, no matter how many years pass. Elena smiled and walked home, ready for whatever came next. 3 years later, she performed her debut concert at Carnegie Hall. Rosa sat in the front row, wearing a dress Elena had bought for her. Around her neck hung the same locket with Miguel's photo inside. When the concert ended and the audience rose to their feet, Elena spoke into the microphone one last time. "My father once told me the music is how the soul speaks when words are not enough. Tonight, I speak for everyone who was ever told they weren't good enough. You are. Keep playing. Keep dreaming. Your moment will come." In the front row, Rosa cried and smiled and clapped until her hands hurt. And somewhere out there, a man named Henry sat in his small apartment, watching the concert on television, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. "That's my girl," he whispered. "That's my brave girl." The end.